Hey folks, welcome to Snowpal Podcast. Our guest today is Steve Senterfit. Steve is the president at SmartBridge. Steve, thanks for taking the time to chat.
Oh, thanks for having me.
My
Looking forward to
pleasure.
this.
I know I gave a very brief intro, but if you could just introduce yourself and your organization to our audience before we get into the topic, we'd appreciate that.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so I'm Steve Senterfit. I've been working now, president of SmartBridge. I've got probably 35, 36 years of total experience in business and technology consulting, spanning a number of different industries. I spent a lot of years in financial services, um, then kind of pivoted over into the energy and the oil and gas sector. I started my career way back in financial services. I was actually a developer. And over the years, just kind of naturally gravitated to more of the consulting side of things, large transformations. It's just kind of gone from there. I've had the opportunity to work in 26 different countries, largely with oil and gas operators internationally. So there's not many places I haven't had the opportunity to see um, and work with a lot of great people over the years.
Oh,
SmartBridge. So we are a digital transformation company. We come in and help organizations really kind of get started or resurrect maybe their digital transformation, a lot in the way of data and analytics, system modernization, and here recently over the past 4 or 5 years, really starting to see the benefits behind a lot of momentum around the AI space. So we're doing quite a bit of work in the artificial intelligence space right now.
thank you so much for the introduction, Steve. Clearly, you have a ton of fantastic experience, and not to, in addition to having done the travels and the experience with working with folks in different countries. And last but not least, you're also a very special guest because, like I mentioned it before I hit record, when I moved to the US like decades ago, I actually studied in Houston, Texas, which is where you're located. So very nice to have
Yep.
somebody from Texas, particularly from Houston. So thank you so much for taking your time.
Yep. And thanks for having me.
Let's get into the topic, right? Without further ado. So, we, I asked you what you were in the mood to talk about, and you mentioned a few different things, and all of them are of equal interest to me. So, just going to pick one at random, and then have the conversation take us where it's going to take us in the next 45 minutes to an hour. You mentioned transformation, right? And you also introduced, the business. You said you're in the business of technology consulting. If you could just kick us
Yep.
off with transformation, especially, I mean, we will get to AI, of course, right? I mean, this day and age, no conversation is complete, be it personal or professional, without a fast sprinkle at the minimum of AI. But even before we get
Yeah.
into AI specifically, Steve, if you could just give us an introduction into transformation. I had the pleasure of talking to somebody else not too long ago on the podcast who is a transformation executive. So I'm a little bit better prepared to asking you a few things. That being said, can you just get us into the conversation?
Yeah. So, digital transformation, it, it, it's been around for a number of years now. I mean, I started doing digital transformation in oil and gas, and they referred to it as digital oil field. And it really was, how do you leverage the digital technology to improve production, um, operations, and effectively, how do you get more oil out of the ground faster, cheaper, and safely? Um, and really, at the end of the day, digital transformation is just a business transformation. And in many cases, digital transformation has been tied to how companies have reinvented themselves using digital technologies, whether it's a restaurant and using digital technologies to improve how fast or how well they can do things in the kitchen, or their customer experience and what that means, right? With the mobile applications and being able to order online versus or on your phone versus having to call, or in the case of a quick serve type restaurant, you always had to go to the store. Um, and you'd have to go through the drive-through or you had to go in. So it really has transformed the business models that a lot of organizations and so but with that has also come some challenges with digital transformation that oftentimes transformation efforts don't succeed, but it's not because the strategy was flawed. It's because the organization didn't think through the different aspects of the ownership, how they're going to do that transformation, conflicting priorities, decision rights, or when it came to the technology side of things, they didn't think through the adoption and how that program was going to be adopted by the business.
Okay, that's actually a very good number of things you said there. Let's dig into some of them deeper. You said
Yeah.
conflict. I mean, I'm going to give you some context here. Given the fact that you're located in Houston and in Texas, I'm going to try and ask you a bunch of things that relate to oil and gas in the space of transformation as well. Because, to be honest, if I don't get this opportunity to have someone from that part of the country all the time, so when I get that opportunity, I want to just touch upon those specifics as well, the
Sure.
verticals, if you will. We'll talk generic transformation, but we also talk to the extent possible how it is applicable specifically to the oil and gas industry and what it means. And learning it from someone like you who's got rich experience there is going to be quite fantastic. So one of the things you mentioned there was conflicting interests, and then you also mentioned technology there. But before we go to technology, can you tell us what those conflicting interests generally are? Is it management's interest being different? Is it the team's interest being different? Is it the client's interest being different? Or is it the provider of that service having a slightly different experience? So there's misalignment between the company that's providing that service of consulting and the client that's actually needing that. So where are some of those conflicts that you've seen?
Really, it really can wind up being any one of the above. And I've seen it across different aspects. Now, a lot of what you'll see is within the organization, right? You typically will have a transformation program and you've got the business aspects of it, you got the IT aspects of it, and within the business, there could be, like in oil and gas, you could be working on a digital transformation program that is spanning drilling and production or even subsurface drilling and production. It could go across the entire life cycle. And you could have competing parts of the business having different views on, even though they have a roadmap and they've kind of signed off on what's going to happen. But when you get into the execution, the priorities don't always seem to stay aligned. And you can have conflicts that arise with that, where everybody's working hard and on the surface, the program might look like it's making progress, but in reality, they're not making the progress that they should be making.
You know,
And I've been involved in some of those where, people don't like change. They don't want to, human nature is, I don't want to change,
right.
right? I've been doing this for 20 years this way. It's good enough.
Why fix
And,
it if it's not
long,
broken, right? Yeah.
in some cases, it may not be that it's broken, but with newer technology, there's quicker ways to do it, right? And we get to the AI, can I actually talk you through one example within oil and gas that potentially has a lot of opportunity. It's both digital transformation and it's AI. But I'll kind of save that for later in the discussion. So, I've seen the challenges from the people side of it, and I think that's where leadership has to look at. It's great to have a vision, it's great to have that strategy, but then it really becomes critical with the governance of that program, ensuring that the leadership is staying aligned on not just the vision and strategy, but the the benefits that you're going to get out of it, who owns those outcomes, and and the change management that's required to make that happen. Because it's not going to happen just because you try to roll out some new technology or a new process. It's got to span people, process, and technology.
Okay. Couple of things there. One is, given the oil and gas industry, and I know literally nothing about it, so if the question is super silly, my apologies up front. I'm presuming, and this could be a wrong presumption, that it's B2B, meaning when you're doing this transformation, when it comes to oil and gas and drilling, are you improving the internal systems of these organizations as opposed to it impacting end users? In other words, if it's a food service business, typically when you're making some of these changes, you're impacting the end user who's ordering that on the platform, on the app or the web app or one of those things. But my first question, Steve, is when we talk oil and gas and transformation, what percentage of that is internal applications and systems that are meant to improve the processes and the efficiencies of the companies running them versus end users like me, a random person, being impacted by those changes?
So it, I hate to say it depends, but it depends. Largely, yes. Upstream, midstream, downstream does get more into the B2C side. So the downstream part of oil and gas also is your retail outlets. So your gas pumps, right? So they have more of a B2C flavor to them, just like any retail business would.
Right.
Uh, Upstream, where I've spent most of my time, and even the midstream area is largely B2B. However, especially with this day and age, when it comes to environment safety and the whole ESG side, and carbon footprint and all that, there's an underlying consumer aspect to this, right? Being able to ensure that the organizations, whatever solutions we're putting in place, what is the positive impact that these solutions can make? And in some cases, the oil and gas companies are doing digital transformation on their ESG programs. So instead of people going out and checking pipelines, they're using drone technology and cameras to detect with sensors on them to be able to detect potential leakages and things like that ahead of the fact before somebody's actually driving around and looking at the wells or the pipelines and different things like that. So even though there's not a direct B2C component, oil and gas companies are well positioned and understand that they have an indirect consumer that they have to ensure is happy with the work that they're doing.
I love your example already. I had a feeling I was going to get excited because I don't know much or anything about oil and gas. And the example that you mentioned is so specific, right? Where you're talking about drones that are going out there to doing things that humans may have had to do in the past. So let's talk
Yeah.
a couple of things there, Steve. So uh, going back to my question as well. So I acknowledge, right? I understand that there is a B2C component, but in the majority of even what you said, then correct me if I'm wrong, it sounded also to me like a lot had to do with the internal systems, right? When you're talking about
Yes.
pipelines and you have drones, it's internal systems. So what percentage, if you have to just give us a random ballpark number, what percentage is B2B versus B2C?
I'd say at least 80% is B2B.
Perfect, right? That's kind of what I thought. Now, which is the reason I asked, because I want to focus on that a lot more because it's more interesting because it's broader as well. But before I get into the specifics of that area, the last question I have is you mentioned drones and hardware. When you talk transformation, right, Steve, the work that you oversee as the president and in your experience, is it hardware, software, a combination? And if it is a combination, what percentage of these transformations happen to be in the space of hardware versus software?
Um, there is a lot. So, I mean, within oil and gas, because of the industrial side of it, there is a lot of physical technology that gets implemented. Um, is it 60%, 50-50 between that and the software? But then you have the services that have to go around it from an implementation standpoint. So I don't know that I have a
But from
exact
somewhere there, right? I
split,
think I get the idea. I think you answered.
but
So the
yeah,
reason,
yeah, there's just it's a significant footprint, and it's not just IT technology. right? You have what's known as OT, operational technology, that is deployed all the way out into at the wellhead. And in some cases, you have companies like your big oilfield service companies and the large oil and gas companies that are putting fiber optics and have put fiber optics downhole. So to be able to pick up more sensor information for fracking and different things like that. So there's a lot of technology, whether that's software technology or physical technology out in the field. There's a significant, it's not just a bunch of guys out there digging holes in the ground with shovels and pickaxes anymore.
Absolutely. No, that's good. The reason I even asked you is a lot of my thought process is going to come around the software side of it, just because that's the only place I have
Yeah.
some experience in. But it's good to know that it's in both areas. So let's talk about now. Let's take some examples, and these could be manufacturer examples or real examples, right? Does not matter. Both are going to benefit our audience here. So let's say a client comes to you in the space of oil and gas, and they need help from Steve and Steve's team from a transformational standpoint. The first thing I want to ask you, Steve, is when we talk technology, especially software, uh, the domain is important to some extent, but not necessarily, right? Because a lot of our work personally, happens in a cross domain space. It does not matter if it's a pharmaceutical industry versus I don't know, insurance industry versus a technology industry. We look at the problem as engineers exactly the same way, which may or may not be necessarily accurate, but that's just the way we go about things. So I want to get your thoughts on, given the fact that you work plentiful in the oil and gas space, when we talk transformations and we talk transformations in that space, and maybe if you could focus on software, that's great. If not, not a big deal. I wanted to know, what is it that are some of those things that might not be applicable to other industries that are very specific to oil and gas? So you, as a transformation executive, so to speak, is able to use your experience in that space directly to the problem, something that someone else who's doing transformations but not in this space of oil and gas would actually
Yeah.
not know how to do.
So the big difference there is digital and business transformation really starts with the business processes. And yes, there's going to be some common processes across any company when you think about their back office, their finance, their accounting. Though oil and gas is unique with the revenue accounting aspects, that not all software packages can do revenue accounting, right? So you have to have a specialized software to do that. And what the company has to go through to make sure that they're paying royalties out is very different than revenue accounting in a restaurant where you're just calculating transactions. Um, so there is a significant difference. You can extrapolate out at a very macro level that, especially with onshore upstream oil and gas, it's a manufacturing process. But at the end of the day, it becomes very unique in the fact that your business process of finding oil, drilling for it, testing it, and then productionizing that is not a common process that can be used by a non-manufacturing company or even just a general manufacturing company that's producing widgets or car batteries or anything like that. They're very different processes, and I think that's where, and I'd stand by this, that digital transformation in the manufacturing industry, though there'll be commonalities across manufacturing, just like there's commonalities across upstream oil and gas, but they're very unique to that segment of the business and
Makes
that
sense.
segment of the industry, that it's not just the software. And even within that, there is software that is very unique that you don't see software companies that are producing a lot of oil and gas technology. They don't produce that same technology for other industries
Right.
because it is so unique to that industry.
Makes sense. So, which means when a client, let's say when you're working with, let's assume two different oil and gas clients who are in that industry, and they come to you with help that they need with respect to transformation. One of the things I presume you might do, and correct me if I'm wrong, is figure out what within their needs is similar to some problems you've solved in the past, right? Because if there is, then you draw a parallel, a commonality, and you might go about it similarly. So but there are things that are unique. But if you took two clients, random oil and gas companies, what are some things that you've seen, Steve, when it comes to transformation that's kind of similar, where you're like, you know what, I've done this dime a dozen times. I can even close my eyes and don't even have to think about it, and I'll do one, two, three, four, five. If you could speak to some of those and also speak to the things that are actually not going to be similar as those clients seem to be, as similar as those industries seem to be, by virtue of your experience that, what, this is going to have to be dealt with differently.
So, I mean, some of it will have to deal with, and I'll just kind of stick to the upstream side of things. Onshore oil and gas, the wells and what you're dealing with is different than what you're dealing with offshore, right? You're dealing with very, very deep water, like in the Gulf of America. So the pressures, the regulations, they're going to be very, very different than what you see onshore. And even within the different basins. So you have a number of different basins in the US. There are some, the common processes and everything that they'll use, but how they have to treat the wells and production optimization may be different in the Appalachian Basin versus Eagle Ford in Texas. Um, just the nature of the type of wells that you have and the treatments that you're going to apply to them. Your process may be similar, but the treatments and what you're going to wind up doing in detail is going to be very different. And that's going to be very different than what you're doing offshore.
Interesting. And wow, this is just amazing. I love to hear a lot more about this because, I lived there for a couple of years, but never had the opportunity to learn anywhere near as much as I'd like to learn about oil and gas. So thanks for humoring my questions here as we chug along, Steve. So now let's say, again, going back to these two clients who come to you for help, what are some of the
Yeah.
initial steps that you take to go? We'll come to AI again in a little bit, but outside of even AI, what are some initial tools that you might use? Probably software tools, maybe even other tools that, hey, there are two clients who have this initial interest in working with us and doing these transformations. So they're going to have a bunch of questions. You're going to have a bunch of questions for them, their requirements. Even before you onboard those clients onto your system, how does that initial conversation go about? And especially, are you using software tools, that are geared to this space in having those, in facilitating those initial conversations with those potential clients?
Yeah. A lot of what we wind up doing is integrating existing systems into optimized type solutions. So, for example, and I get a little bit into the AI here, um, we've actually got two different customers that we're in discussions with around using AI for chemical injection optimization to help them reduce their OPEX. So they spend an X amount of money uh, um, on different fields and different assets that they have with their chemical programs to prevent corrosion, scaling, and a number of different aspects. That's what those programs are meant to do. Right now, most organizations are still doing it, I'll say manually. They look at what's worked in the past, but just a human is making the decision that based on what data is coming up out of the well into from their SCADA system through these sensors. Um, they're making decisions based on what's worked in the past. Well, you can now take AI and apply it to years of data that they have, and the AI system can make faster recommendations because it can analyze all this data at one time. And so using AI to make recommendations, it's still going to be an individual, a human or a group of humans that make the decision on we're going to apply X, Y, and Z from a scaling standpoint, or we're going to modify the program to do this. But it's AI that's giving them and saying, hey, based on everything, all the information that it has, lab tests and all this, here's a recommended treatment over the next 30, 45, 90 days, whatever they're looking at, where it can help them reduce their operating expenses when it comes to the chemical treatments, where before they weren't really measuring that level of detail. And the thing about it is, what may work in Italy on a field, you may have to tweak that AI model for what's going to work in the Haynesville area in Texas and Louisiana, because the wells are different. Your temperatures are different. Your chemical treatments would have been different historically. You're still looking at the same aspects, but the solution may need to be a little different because you have different formations, the well types are different, and things like that.
Steve, as you speak here, right, one couple of things become clearer to me. One is the depth of experience that someone has working in a certain industry, the level of interest they have, the passion they have, and the number of years of experience they have doing something that they've done for long periods of time makes somebody know a lot more about that topic. I mean, it might sound like I'm stating the obvious, but there's a reason why I'm literally doing that. So
Yeah, sure.
you talk so much about oil and gas, and a lot of this is like over my head, right? It's highly technical. That's very specific to that industry. You mentioned AI, so this is a good segue into the next thing I want to ask you about. One of the, I don't know if I could say misconceptions, but I'm going to say it for lack of a better word, about AI is people sometimes, or maybe all the time, just depends on the group you're having this conversation with, tend to believe that, let me step back a bit, right? That what I'm trying to say that in a long-winded manner to make it short is people think that AI is going to replace people. I mean, sure, it's going to replace humans to some extent, maybe even a larger extent. But if you took Krish as an example, and both Krish and Steve were handed the same set of AI tools, and they had to both work with an oil and gas client potentially, I can tell you, there's no surprise here. I would have no clue because I'm going to have to ask the AI all these basic questions from the get go. Whereas you would use it very differently because you have plentiful, rich experience around that industry and you know what to actually do. You're going to use AI to just make yourself more efficient. And there's a significant difference between these two. Yet, I don't think people necessarily acknowledge that. I don't know if I've articulated that well enough, Steve, but if I have, I just want to get your thoughts on where are some space areas that you've seen or you're beginning to see AI make an impact in things that you're doing, but where are some areas that you think that human element, that human experience is still, at least at this point, at the time of this recording, you think seems to be irreplaceable?
So it's the human judgment, and whether it's in oil and gas or restaurant, food and beverage, it could be in the med tech manufacturing space. When we're talking to organizations about implementing and adopting AI in different areas, our initial approach with all executives and business leaders is keeping a human in the loop. Right. You'll read a lot about agentic AI and AI being able to reason and make decisions. And yes, it can. And you can do some of that today. However, where organizations can make mistakes is not clearly defining who owns the outcomes, the business outcomes that an AI solution is making, whether it's a recommendation or you're telling it, okay, I want you to automate this payment process, right? The business or somebody still has to own that outcome. AI is going to make mistakes, right? We've seen that,
All the
right? It
time, yeah.
it will still your it doesn't matter how well you train your model, the model is going to drift over time. All right. We know AI hallucinates. It's only as good as the data that it's been fed, whether it's a large language model or it's a machine learning algorithm, more from a traditional AI perspective. And the humans still have to monitor this and ensure, especially if you're dealing with a highly regulated industry. Not that oil and gas is overly regulated, but there are a lot of regulated industries here that you can't just unleash AI without the proper governance and, as we put it, humans in the loop to be able to monitor and say, yep, that's the right. So when we're talking to these oil companies about this AI chemical injection program, the whole concept is there's a human in the loop. It's not AI will make recommendations. It's a human that's going to make the decision. Yes, we're going to go with that recommendation, or if we're not going to go with that recommendation, here's why we're not going to go with that recommendation, so that you have a feedback loop into the AI system to improve over time to know, okay, based on these scenario and the data that was presented, I made a decision, made a recommendation of X, Y, and Z. But humans are saying it should have been A, B, and C. And so that it gets smarter over time.
So let's say using these tools, let me what are some of the tools that are specific to your industry, say oil and gas? When we're talking about AI, like if someone had to, part of what we try to accomplish here, Steve, on the podcast, to the extent possible,
Yeah.
is try to give people some actionable items. They go with a certain level of understanding, but then they're like, you know what? I need to try something so I can digest the learning that I've gotten out of these rich conversations. So, what are some tools and technologies that you actually like to use to help you be more productive in this space that you might recommend to some of us?
Yeah. So that's kind of a multifaceted question. There are AI technologies and, in some cases, different types of machine learning algorithms that we might apply, whether it's a regression model, um, or profit, if we're looking at some type of predictive forecasting for sales and the restaurant industry, right? And some of those you can get free, um, kind of off the shelf these days. What we So there's that aspect of it, that we will look at the problem that we're trying to solve and what additional data sources might be needed, and can that model handle that, or do we have to come with more of an embedded model that is really taking advantage of three or four different algorithms from a machine learning standpoint, and that aspect of AI. When it comes to more of what you see in the market now, we might leverage something like Cursor or Claude to help put some of the initial code structure in place. Um, and so that's an aspect. Um, we do a lot with the Microsoft technology. So we're a Microsoft partner. So we will leverage Microsoft's technology when it comes to machine learning, ML ops, for example. Now that's just leveraging the machine learning algorithms and how that whole workflow needs to occur. We'll use Copilot, and Microsoft has a technology called Copilot Studio that lets you build very custom Copilot agents. They can be both reactive, kind of like a chat GBT. I ask a question, it gives me an answer. Or you can start building proactive ones that are um, monitoring and take signals when things change in your data sets, and they can, to some extent, wake up and start acting on that data and the changes and make recommendations, or it could be alerting that maybe has to go back to the end user. Hey, something's changed here. It's outside the deviation that we're supposed to be working in. You need to go monitor this. So
Okay.
the short answer is there's a lot of different AI technologies that we even leverage ourselves to deliver a solution to our customer.
Makes sense. I have a question for you based on what you mentioned there. You mentioned Microsoft Copilot. Now, I have we're talking AI, so this is as good a time as any, given that tool that you mentioned there. Uh, I'm sure you're familiar, see, but for those who are not, I'm just going to state some things I've read recently. I think the adoption that Microsoft's gotten out of their Copilot has been quite abysmal, for lack of a better word. In other words, I think, roughly speaking, I think they have about half, I don't know, like 500 million seats that they sell of these Microsoft 365 licenses and whatnot. Take my number with a grain of salt, but I know it's somewhere around there. And I think I read that their adoption was like 15 million users are actually paying for Copilot, which is only like 3 to 4% of their entire user
Yeah.
base. And this is on top of the fact that Microsoft, just like every other hyperscaler, has been spending hundreds of billions of dollars. I mean, there's so many data centers that these companies own. Happen to live in Northern Virginia, which is probably got one of the highest number of data centers in the country here, the suburbs of Washington, D.C. So let's talk a little bit about adoption and why there is a gap. And I think we're also having this conversation at an interesting time with the stock market doing not so well for a number of reasons, and these companies yet continue to spend that money into AI. And the one last thing I would say that before I get your thoughts there, Steve, is I keep going back to the Alphabet CEO Sundar had said a few quarters ago in one of the earnings calls that the risk of spending on AI is actually a lot lesser than not doing it. So they continue to put hundreds of billions of dollars into capex, particularly in the space of AI. So, given this, just want to get your thoughts on, like, in your industry, in the oil and gas industry, what do you see as the rate of adoption for some of these AI tools? Do you see it as hype? Do you see it as actually bringing concrete value? Where do your company, where do your clients generally happen to
Yeah.
be when it comes to AI?
Yeah. So what I would say is within oil and gas and specifically upstream oil and gas, AI is not new. So I was with, I guess it's okay for me to say it. I was with Halliburton for a number of years, back in the early 2010 to about 2014. We were doing neural networks and machine learning algorithms way back then. And we were developing patents for different algorithms. So AI, and that is AI. What's new are the large language models and the ease at which people can implement AI type solutions. But it's not new. So a lot of organizations, I mean, in manufacturing, they've been looking at predictive maintenance for a long time, and that's using neural networks and machine learning algorithms to be able to say that, okay, based on these vibrations coming off this particular manufacturing line, you need to replace your compressor within the next 2 or 3 days because it's going to go out. Those things have been going on for 10, 15 years. So the adoption you're talking about is more with this newer technology, with the generative AI side of things. And even when I'm talking about using Copilot, it's not using the Copilot 3 that comes with 365. This is a separate, so this is leveraging Microsoft Copilot Studio, which effectively sits on top of their OpenAI that sits in your secure Azure environment. And you're using machine learning operations, their ML ops, their Foundry components to build sophisticated AI models. Um, and yes, there could be a Copilot question and answer interface, but it's not the same one that is sitting
Right.
in
Okay.
Microsoft Office 365. I think that just my 2 cents on where Microsoft may be having struggle and other organizations are struggling, even with the, I know a downstream oil company that was going down the path of enterprise chat GBT, and they were having similar challenges with adoption. And it's the fact that the organization is giving a tool, but not really changing the process or educating or training the individuals on how to best use that tool.
Absolutely.
So, if I give you, a fishing rod, but I don't teach you how to fish, you're going
Then
to,
we're
well,
going
that's
to
a
do
cool
that.
tool.
Yeah.
I'm going to put it over here up against my wall and it's going to sit there
That
versus not taking the adoption aspect seriously and actually training people. How do I use Copilot 360, within 365 and use it in Excel or use it in Word or PowerPoint or some of that? It takes training.
Actually, you make a very good point there. So, it's one thing to have these tools and technologies available, but it's entirely another to A, to put them to use at all to begin with, or B, to put them to use the way that those tools were intended to be used. And there could be gaps in all of
Yeah.
these spaces. So how do you a lot of it is also muscle memory, right? When you've done some things, and you mentioned me this at the top of this conversation, you said that people as us as humans, we are generally averse to changes because it's just not a comfortable thing. Given the pace at which these changes are happening right now thanks to AI, how do you think companies should actually react to this? Maybe they are proactive, maybe they don't have to react to it, but regardless, how do you expect that to work? I mean, it's one thing to say I'm going to have everyone go through training. I don't know about oil and gas in particular, Steve, but I can speak to from a software standpoint. If you're in smaller companies and startups, you don't have the money to actually have people go send
Right.
them
You
for
don't.
training or
Yeah.
even give them the time to train because your stuff does not get done. So what are some ways that you've seen that work so companies can adopt it? And what are some ways that you've seen where it doesn't just seem to work for some reason?
So one way even a smaller company can see some success with this, or mid-sized company, is maybe you don't send everybody in the company through the training, but as part of the rollout, identify one or two, or maybe it's a half a dozen, what I refer to as super users. They're the very experienced people. They're interested in this, and it's easy to find them within the organization. Typically, because more than likely they were already using the tools, even if you didn't want them to, right?
Right.
There's plenty of examples of people using the public version of ChatGPT and uploading financials and whatever else from the
Right.
company, right? You don't want to do that. So, as part of that education, finding the people that are really interested in this, let them be the influencers within the organization. Typically, they're going to be more senior, and they can actually help ensure adoption. This is something I've done going back 15, 20 years with just software adoption, right? You build software, you start to roll it out. Well, if IT builds something and just throws it over the fence, probably not going to go anywhere. But if you've engaged the business and you've got a couple of super users that are helping you with the requirements, making sure it's got the right user interface, and then they're able to help take it and educate and promote it, right? Adoption is as much about marketing a piece of solution or a transformation as it is the technical components of it. So there's a marketing aspect of how you get the organization excited about it. And that can't be done in a silo.
Makes sense. What are say there's you use a number of tools you mentioned, you AI and outside of AI as well to make yourself and your team productive. But even when we have these tools, there's always something that we're looking for that we cannot seem to find for some reason. I can speak to it from what I do, but what I want to ask you here, Steve, is what are some tools from a software standpoint specifically that you're like, you know what, hey, I wish that there was something that did this. Either it could be while you're sort of working with the client before they onboard, or maybe it's during the onboarding of that client, or perhaps during the time that you're working with that client and helping them be successful. Are there some things that might be specific to the industry that you're like, you know what, there are some tools that kind of do it, but maybe they're dated, maybe they have not caught up to speed with what's going on, and you're like, you know what, I wish there was a tool or two that did X, Y, and Z. What are there? Is there something like that?
Where I see, and this is kind of in the AI space, where I see a little bit of a challenge right now is around the governance. So there are mature technologies when it comes to data governance, information governance, and just security in general. But when it comes to the AI side of it, there's still between the operationalizing it and the governance side, there's a little bit of a gap there.
Which means
So,
you mentioned,
and I
sorry,
think it's probably something that's going to evolve over time because, like anything else, I mean, 5, 10 years ago, even data governance was pretty complicated, and things have gotten a lot easier now with more of the modern um, cloud and data architectures that are out there, whether it's a Microsoft or a Snowflake or Databricks. Governance has become something that's embedded in those platforms, and they've really matured that. Where back 15 years ago, 20 years ago, when I was dealing with data governance, it was ugly. It was a lot of manual process to it.
and also probably it's also directly proportional to some extent to the amount of regulation that an industry happens to have, right? You mentioned this, it's not
Yeah,
overly regulated, but there's still some regulations when it comes to oil and gas. Healthcare has regulations, right? There are some industries that have more regulations than others, and governance becomes all the more important in industries that are highly regulated.
right, right. And trying to do that with a streamlined, lightweight tool set, for lack of better terms, is a bit of a challenge right now.
And as we have another 10 minutes to go, I'm going to give you an opportunity to ask you anything you want to ask me, Steve, but just the last couple of questions, which is given everything that's changing, right? You've been doing this a long time. You're a technology person. You've seen things change, but I think things are changing a lot more rapidly than they have ever in the past, right? At least from what I can see. Uh, that
Yeah.
means you have to make changes and accommodations in many facets of what you do as a business. So let's talk about a couple of those things. One is when it comes to hiring, when you're looking for people to help you with something, ha- have you started looking for skills differently? The way you interview, the way you try to, figure out if this person is actually going to be someone who can help you. Has your interviewing process changed at all? Has it changed dramatically? Changed some, not changed? If so, can you speak to it so a lot of the listeners or the watchers here who are looking to graduate from college, maybe they're in college, maybe they just graduated, it's an
Yeah.
interesting time to be looking for work. So I just want to get your thoughts on that space.
Yeah. So, hiring, how we hire has changed. The types of resources we need to find um, is evolving with everything that is changing. Trying to make sure that we are finding resources that are familiar with AI, have used it in some capacity. Um, Granted, we like the opportunity to kind of train people ourselves, but um, you always want to find people that are at least a little bit familiar with it. And um, that's the other aspect is, just this that side. When we're interviewing has also changed drastically. So we have to be very careful, right? People, I hate to say it, but they will try to fool you on interviews.
Right.
Okay,
Totally.
I'm trying to give everybody the benefit of the doubt here, but we are very cautious in the way that we test people's knowledge, recording sessions, trying to look at how they're answering. Are they sitting there conversing with ChatGPT
Yeah.
and answering our questions? And in some cases, we have caught people that the person we interviewed was not the person that came
Oh
on the
my
next interview.
goodness. Yeah, I can imagine.
Right. So
Yeah.
there are things that we have to do because they're using AI to get jobs that maybe they aren't qualified for.
Right.
So it is definitely changing the dynamics there when it comes to what we have to look for and how we have to go about our interviews.
It's very important what you say that because it's hard to find good. I always say when you're hiring software engineers, it's hard to find good software engineers, but what's actually even harder is to find credible engineers, right? Which is applicable to any
Yeah.
space, so to speak. And as a startup in the last many years, Steve, I've been bitten on the wrong side myself. So you try to change to keep up with how else can, what are some of the ways that people can quote unquote cheat you, right? For lack of a better word. And you've got to be better prepared. And with AI, it's become all the more difficult. Um, but one of the last things I was going to ask you before I give you the chance to ask me something is college degrees and diploma. Uh, for the longest periods of time, it's been look. People are generally proud to to go to college or
Yeah.
graduate with a diploma. And uh, I'll tell you a quick story, which is when I moved to the U.S., which was many decades ago, I went to school in at the University of Houston, Texas, and I was helping out with one of the graduation ceremonies. And I was actually here for my third master's, and I'd never been to a convocation ceremony ever. I didn't end up going to one here either because I had got a job and I'd moved to Ohio at the time. But when I saw parents come there, just be emotional about it, and kids be very proud, that was quite a revelation to me, just culturally, Steve, because growing up in India, it was just taken for granted that, okay, you have to, you're graduating from high school, you got to go to college. And after I graduated, my dad was like, "What are you going to do next?" Before he would even congratulate on the graduation, the immediate or the precursor was, "What you're doing next?" So I think it was very nice for me to see that parents were emotional and happy and proud about this whole thing. I want to fast forward like 3 decades. I'm not sure how long this system of education is going to stay the way it is. I mean, people have differing opinions. I want to get your thoughts on education,
Yeah.
college degree. How much importance do you think that is going to be in the coming years?
I don't have a crystal ball. Um, I do think there's a shift that's happening right now. I for at least the short term. What that short term is that 5 years, 10 years, there's still a bit of, especially with building, whether it's an AI solution or you're just modernizing applications, doing software development, there is still the engineering aspects that you have to have. Now, once you've got 4 or 5 years experience, what you learned in college, you know, you can probably get around it if you've got five or
Right.
six
Yeah.
years of experience, right? So you can probably catch up if you didn't, or, it could be a pivot to where it's more, okay, a 2 year degree or 2 years just to get the basics of understanding the engineering aspects, how to problem solve. Because a lot of what we're doing is problem solving. So
Absolutely.
there's still a piece of that I think is always going to be important, um, but it may not be as important or as much prestige as we want to put on the traditional education system that you see today.
Okay. Before I go to my last question to you, which is a non-technical one, it's about food. Do you have any questions that you might want to ask me, Steve?
Um, where do you see? I mean, you're in the software business, so uh, where do you see things evolving with AI and without AI, just traditional software?
You know, here's my take on it. As somebody who's been building software and just that for the last 25 years, I never thought that this was an industry where things moved slowly, right? That it never was the case. Things always moved quick enough, probably faster than a lot of the other industries, in my opinion. But what's different is in the last year or two, as we all know, the pace of that change has been more rapid than a lot of us have ever seen before. So there is still a seismic shift. Even if you were somebody who are not programming in the same language year after year, and we're not using the same framework month after month, you'd still have to make a mental shift to keep up with what's happening today. And that's the truth. Because you're going from, hey, even simple questions like when you were deploying to say one of these cloud providers like 3 years ago, you could pick from AWS, Azure, Google Cloud, one of the three, and
Yeah,
you're not going to go wrong. It just depends on what you like, what your background was for with. Now it's not the same. There's a plethora of neo clouds that have come into play. Each of them give you a different type of functionality. That support that they provide is different. So when you talk to people of, are you going to pick one of these three hyperscalers? Maybe, maybe not. They could pick something else entirely, right? The question is, do you trust that those providers will be around for years to come? Because a lot of tools that happen to come to existence right now, Steve, I don't know if they're all going to survive or stand the test of time. I think 90%
yeah,
of them will not exist, which means if you're any company, you've got to be careful where you put your money and your commitments. But it's all the more important to startups and smaller companies like the one I run, for instance, because you don't have the luxury of doing what Zuckerberg did with Reality Labs, where
yes.
you spend $80 billion and you're like, you know what, this thing is not working. Or with Apple, with tens of billions of dollars in Apple cars not working. So we can't afford that. Sorry, you're going to say something.
No, 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 no. Go ahead.
Yep. I was just going to say that. So I think it's important to adapt to what's changing, adopt the right suite of technologies. So, you believe, and a lot of it is hunch as well. No matter how much you read, no matter how much you do, you're going to have to do that stuff to learn more about that stuff, whatever that stuff is. And people discount the value that experience and hunch brings to the table. I mean, when you talk oil and gas, you can clearly tell how much Steve knows about oil and gas and about engineering and transformation. I think people have to be very careful about not discounting the value that humans bring to the table while recognizing the value that AI is also bringing to the table, and find that happy medium between experience, technology, and credibility. So you actually have a successful project as opposed to one that you put a lot of money in only to think that, you know what, this thing is not going well.
Yeah, yeah. No, I completely agree with what you're saying there. I will tell you, in all of the AI work and even digital transformation work that I've done over the years, I really can't point to any of them that just led to a bunch of layoffs. It was really about empowering people to be able to work on higher value work than dealing with a lot of the repetitive kind of non-value work that a lot of companies have to deal with. Um, on your on your comment about what may be out there in the next, from a technology, right? You've got three major cloud providers. You got other ones out there as well. On the AI side, I won't say that I think it's a .com bubble, but there's going to be a consolidation on this AI stuff. Um,
Which is,
what
you could,
what it's going to look like, it's inevitable. I mean, you've got all of this capital that's gone in. You've got all these startups. Yes, you got some of the big players there, but you've also got thousands and thousands, if not millions, of startups in the AI space. It's there's going to be a consolidation of that, but I don't think it's going to look like the .com boom that when the bubble popped um, back in the dot-com era. I don't think it's going to be the economic side of it and things. I think it's going to be more just a natural consolidation of a handful of players.
I couldn't agree more with you. I'll just add one more thing for what it's worth, which is during the dot com bubble in the 2000s, right? A lot of companies, there was they appreciated in value, but they didn't, when you went to their, when they reported earnings, they didn't report any profits. They didn't report even revenues that were
Yeah,
increasing. So there's a seismic difference between that, and people ask this. I think you made the point already. I was just adding one more to that. For what it's worth is right now these companies are reporting pretty big numbers. When Meta had its earnings, they've blown through every single earnings report. The only reason they've been penalized, I think, is because of the capex and people's concerns about where that money is going, if it's going to be worthwhile. And people have asked me a number of times, Steve is on the podcast, like, I live in Northern Virginia, like I said before. What happens to all these data centers? Will there ever come a time we have hundreds of thousands of square footage that's actually becoming like the malls of America these days, where nobody wants to go to the mall to shop? I don't think so. But you hope that it's not the case, because these companies have brilliant people, brilliant minds, and no dearth of money. So you
yeah.
have to believe that they're probably doing the right thing. But the last thing I want to ask you, if it's all right, is do you ever have any anxiety or concern about any of the stuff that's happening in the space of AI? Or do you sleep peacefully thinking, you know what, this is good, it's going the right direction, I have no skepticism whatsoever?
I mean, if I have any concern, it can be used so well for humanity, but there are a lot of bad actors out there. Just like, I mean, we've had cyber issues ever since the internet came around, right? They steal your credit cards, you this, that, you know, and it's generated and created a whole new um, industry from cyber protection and all that. That's probably the only thing that keeps me up at night is what are the bad guys going to, and kind of who defines the bad guys, but how are people going to try to use this maliciously?
Right.
Because I've heard stories that, we talk about the big mega data centers that are coming online now. Well, we didn't even talk about quantum computing.
Yeah.
And now all of a sudden you're taking a data center and just sent it through the moon, so to speak, and what it can process in the matter of seconds. And I've heard stories that if you take quantum computer and you take some of these AI algorithms and somebody wanted to hack every password in the world, it would take no time at all. Yeah,
Wow.
that makes you worry a little bit. Now,
A
will it
little
ever
bit. Yeah.
happen? Who
Yeah.
knows, right? Because at the same time, we know people are going to be thinking like that. There are really smart people thinking about how do we protect it at the same time.
I think very well said there. And since you mentioned quantum computing, I'm just going to mention a couple of companies that, I closely watch as well. I can think of some ticker symbols. I think one is like QBTS, one is QUBT, and there's RJTI and IonQ, and there's a few of them. But yeah, that's a conversation for another day altogether, quantum computing. But
It,
thanks for
it
mentioning
is.
that.
It is.
So any other questions you have for me, Steve?
Nope.
The last thing I want to ask you is, you're going out to dinner, you can order whatever you want to order, money's no object, and it doesn't even have to be the same cuisine. If you could give us what your choice of appetizer, entree, and dessert would be.
Let's see. It's a good question. Um, so probably Cajun would be, well, the appetizer um, could be a spinach and artichoke dip or something along those lines. If I'm doing seafood, obviously it'd be something a little different. But I'm a big Cajun fan. I love Cajun food. I lived in New Orleans for better part of 10 years. Um, so anytime I can go to a place like Commander's Palace, and that's probably more French Cajun than anything, um, that would be what I'd be looking for. So something along those lines. Dessert wise, it would either be the bread pudding, or I'm a big chocolate fan. So you can't go wrong with a chocolate molten lava type cake.
You could never go wrong. I can eat one, and then living in the US, the size of these cakes is, you have to explain the size, because I had a friend or coworker come from England one time. I took her to a
Yeah,
restaurant. We were there for lunch, and then she ordered the food and someone delivered to her. And then her name was Sarah. I still remember. She was like, "Hey, I think you got the order wrong. I didn't mean for the whole table, just for me." And then the waiter went, "Ma'am, that's just for you." I still remember that vividly, that conversation. Yeah. So
yeah,
you want
yeah,
chocolate cakes? There's
yeah,
no,
and
there's no places to go to.
yeah, and I'd say I didn't actually give you the entree. It would have to be crawfish, which a lot of your people might go, "What in the world?" I can eat crawfish every day.
Lovely. Thanks for sharing that meal with us, Steve. Uh, so I'm going to let you have the closing comment. Again, thank you very much for taking the time. I will include the link to both your company and your LinkedIn profile, so folks can certainly reach out to you.
Okay.
Again, folks, by way of reintroduction, had this wonderful conversation about all things transformation and oil and gas with Steve Senterfit, who's the president at SmartBridge. So Steve, take away and have your closing comment.
All right. Well, I really, truly enjoyed the conversation, enjoyed the discussion, learned a little bit as well, which is always something I enjoy. Hopefully, your audience will enjoy and take a few pieces away about
Absolutely.
things that are going on if they're in a transformation program, and you know things they need to think about as those things are executing, and making sure that that transformation is actually adopted. On the AI side, um, there's a lot to come. I think we're just hitting the tip of the iceberg, so to speak.
Lovely. With that, folks, thank you. Thanks to Steve. And until next time, bye
Okay.
bye.